The rope cut into her wrists, coarse and tight, each strand biting deeper the longer she leaned against the post. Sunlight fell harsh upon her, hammering heat against her neck until sweat rolled in thin, shining tracks down her dusty skin. She did not cry. Her lips pressed thin, her eyes narrowed against the glare, though the whispering crowd before her tried its best to see her break. "Drunk's daughter," someone muttered. "Pain is debts and shame." Children giggled and tossed pebbles at her boots. A merchant woman clucked her tongue, hands on her hips, muttering about sin and disgrace. 2 cowhands passed by, laughing as though her hunger were a stage show put on for their amusement. Each passerby gave judgment with their silence or their scorn. The post had held horse thieves and card cheats, but today it held only a girl, thin, sunburned, her father's ruin bound tight around her wrists. The street shimmered under the sun. Dust hung heavy, stirred by boots and wagon wheels, clinging to skirts and mustaches alike. Across the way, the saloon's doors creaked open and shut with a steady rhythm, letting out snatches of piano music and men's rough laughter. No one from inside stepped forward to help her. The sheriff leaned near the barber's chair, spitting into the dirt, saying nothing. His badge glinted like a warning. She shifted her shoulders, trying to ease the bite of the rope. The effort earned her a jeer from a freckled boy. "Wiggle, wiggle, shame don't slip free," he shouted, and the crowd laughed with him. She kept her eyes fixed on the horizon, refusing them the victory of seeing her bend. Then, boots on the boards. A slow, steady tread. Not hurried, not hesitant. Each step thudded against the wood of the boardwalk, carrying across the open street, until even the piano inside the saloon seemed to falter. A figure stepped down into the dust. Tall, shoulders stooped slightly as though long miles had been ridden on his back. His coat was plain, his hat low, shadowing eyes that scanned the scene without hurry. In one hand he held a rough brown loaf of bread, still warm enough that the crust bore cracks of heat. The drunk's daughter dared not look at him at first. She felt his presence long before his shadow reached her, stretching across the post like a shade of relief against the blistering sun. The whispers started immediately. "Who's that?" "The rancher. Lives out past Cottonwood Canyon." "Strange one. Keeps to himself." The sheriff lifted his head from the barber's rail, narrowed his eyes. The saloon owner leaned into the doorway, a cigar hanging unlit at his lip. Tension thickened, invisible but sharp as barbed wire. The man stopped before her. His boots sank slightly in the soft dust, his shadow swallowing hers. He looked at her hands bound to the post, then at her cracked lips. For a moment, nothing moved. The town held its breath. He broke the loaf in two, the crust crackling loud enough for all to hear. The sound was sharp, defiant like a gun's first click. Slowly, without a word, he held out half the bread. The crowd murmured. Shock, amusement, anger, all tangled. The sheriff spat again, louder this time. The saloon owner's grin was thin, venomous. The girl stared at the bread, pride and hunger tearing inside her. She wanted to spit, to refuse, to keep what little dignity the town had not yet stripped. But her stomach twisted like a knotted rope, betraying her with a low growl the crowd surely heard. His hand did not waver. The bread waited, steady, offered without pity, without demand. Only bread. At last, she leaned forward. The rope cut deeper, but she stretched far enough to catch the crust between her teeth. He let go, and she pulled it into her bound hands, cradling it close as though it were treasure. A silence heavier than the sun fell across the street. Every eye fixed on the rancher. He did not look at them. He simply stood, watching the girl eat her first bite in 2 days. The sheriff's jaw worked. "That'll do, stranger," he said, his voice sharp as spurs. "She's tied there for shame, not feed in." The rancher turned his head slightly, just enough that the shadow of his hat lifted and the crowd caught the glint of storm-gray eyes. He said nothing. Silence carried heavier than any argument. The saloon owner chuckled low, smoke curling from his lip though no match had lit it. "Kindness don't serve a man well in dust's heart," he said. "Best you keep to your cattle, rancher." Still the rancher gave no answer. He tipped his hat forward once, slow, then turned and walked back across the street. His boots crunched steady against the dust, leaving prints the wind would not soon cover. Behind him, the girl chewed quietly, each mouthful an act of defiance. The crowd broke apart, muttering, uncertain. The sheriff rubbed his badge, unsettled. The saloon owner narrowed his eyes, as though measuring the distance between himself and the man's back. From somewhere above, an old storyteller's voice carried like a dry wind. That day, the town saw a man feed the hungry where shame had starved her. And though it seemed no more than bread in the sun, there are some gestures that echo louder than gunfire. The folks of Dust's Heart felt it, though they didn't yet know. They'd seen the first shadow of a storm. The saloon doors slammed wide as two men staggered out, laughter sharp, boots scuffing the boards. Their talk carried across the street, loud enough for the girl to hear where she crouched in the alley, the half-loaf of bread hidden beneath her shawl. Rancher's gone soft, one of them barked. Feed in the drunks whelp like she was worth savon. The other spat into the dirt, then kicked at a stray chicken. Sheriff won't stomach it long. Mark me, that man's got trouble hid in his bones. Their laughter trailed off into the night, but the words stayed behind, heavy as iron. The girl pulled the shawl tighter around her shoulders. Hunger gnawed still, but she saved the bread, each crumb guarded. Pride made her keep to shadows, though she knew whose hand had given it. When a shape moved at the mouth of the alley, her heart leapt. It was him, the rancher. A lantern's glow caught the hard lines of his face, though his eyes stayed hidden under the brim of his hat. He didn't step forward, only set a tin plate on the ground, scraps of meat, a heel of cheese. Then he turned, already gone before she could decide whether to thank him or curse him for pity. From the boarding house window above, the widow watched. Her wrinkled hands rested on the sill, her breath fogging faint against the glass. She shook her head once, slow, whispering into the empty room. Mans carry in more than kindness. I've seen that weight before. Morning brought no peace. The sheriff stood outside the general store, talking too loud, making sure half the town heard. Rancher's been sniffing where he don't belong, he said, voice clipped, thumb hooked in his belt. Girl's punishment's her own. He interferes again, might find himself hogtied to that same post. Merchants nodded. Cowhands muttered. The saloon owner leaned against a porch beam, smoke curling from his lips, and smiled as though the sheriff's words were music meant for him alone. Across the street, the rancher loaded flour and salt into his wagon. He said nothing, though every back seemed turned toward him, every whisper circling his name. His hands were steady, his movements plain, but in his silence there was something that made men shift on their boots. The widow came down from the boarding house, skirts brushing the dust, her shawl pulled tight. She passed close by his wagon and murmured, "You'll make enemies fast, mister. Men round here don't forgive pride dented in public." He looked at her then, not with warmth, but with the flat stillness of a man who had known worse. She held his gaze a moment before stepping on, muttering low, "Storm follows you. I can smell it." By sundown, the girl had tried the smithy, the mercantile, even the kitchen at the hotel. Everywhere the answer was the same. "We don't need help. Don't want your father's curse. Sheriff says you're trouble enough." Each door closed with a slam. Each rejection left her thinner, smaller. She wandered back to the alley, sank against the wall, and held the bread close, though it had gone hard. She bit into it anyway, each chew like swallowing stones. Footsteps stopped nearby. She lifted her head. The rancher stood there again, arms crossed. In his silence, she saw not pity, but a recognition, like he knew hunger, knew the weight of shame. "I don't want charity," she rasped. "Wasn't charity," he said. His voice was rough, low. "Was bread." Her jaw set. Same thing. A flicker passed in his eyes, quick as lightning in far-off hills. Then he turned, walked away without another word, leaving her tangled between pride and longing. Night settled heavy. Coyotes cried out from the ridges, their voices carrying like lost souls. The wind brought the smell of sage and distant rain, though no clouds covered the stars. In the saloon, the sheriff leaned over his whiskey, speaking low to the owner. "That rancher's stirring folk. Ain't good." The saloon owner's smile was thin. Ain't good for you, maybe. Me? I see a man with ghosts. Push him right, he'll break. Men like that, they don't bend, they snap. Loud. The sheriff's hand hovered near his badge, as though it burned against his chest. He muttered, I'll give him warning. The piano played on. The laughter rolled. But under it all, the town could feel something tightening, like a noose being pulled one knot closer. At the edge of town, the widow watched from her porch as the rancher tended his horse beneath the pale moon. He brushed its mane slow, his shoulders bent in silence. The old woman's eyes narrowed. Soldiers' hands, she whispered. Not ranchers. A man don't hold himself that way unless he's been taught by war. Her memory stirred. Campfires, telegrams. Men returned with eyes hollowed out by things no words could carry. Yet the rancher's weight felt older, stranger, as though the war he'd seen was not theirs, not yet even born on this soil. She shivered, drew her shawl tight, and turned from the window. By morning the story had spread. At the well, at the store, at the barber's chair, folks repeated the same thing. Sheriff don't like him. Saloon man's watching him close. Best keep distance. The girl heard it all. She kept her eyes down, her stomach hollow, though some part of her knew each whisper was tied to that loaf of bread, that tin plate, those silent footsteps in the night. When she passed the rancher on the street, she muttered, They'll come for you. He looked at her, his face unreadable. They already have. And just like that, he walked on, boots steady, leaving her with a shiver she could not name. Above it all, the storyteller's voice drifted like dust across the plain. Men feared him not for what he'd done, but for what they saw buried deep, quiet as a rattler coil beneath the rock. A man may try to bury his past beneath cattle and soil, but the earth remembers. The town of Dust's heart felt it then, though they would not say it aloud. Something was coming, and when it came, no one would claim surprise. The girl's scream split the evening air, sharp as a hawk's cry. She was backed against the water trough, 3 men closing in, their shadows stretching long in the lantern glow. One leaned close, teeth yellow, whiskey strong on his breath. Saloon man says you ought to learn your place. His hand clamped her arm. She jerked free, stumbled, struck the trough hard. The second man laughed, drawing a circle in the dust with his boot, slow, taunting. The third cracked his knuckles, grinning wide. Then the sound came, boots on wood, steady as thunder in the distance. The rancher stepped from the alley, his hat low, his coat brushing against his legs with each stride. The men froze, half smirking, half uncertain. Well, the first one sneered. Here's her savior. The rancher didn't answer. He walked straight into their circle, calm as a man crossing a quiet pasture. His hand rose, not to his hip, but to the first man's collar. With a twist, sudden and sure, he yanked the man forward and slammed him flat against the trough. The crack of skull onward echoed down the street. The second man lunged. In a blur, the rancher caught his wrist, turned it, and sent him sprawling face first into the dust with a grunt. The third raised a fist, swung wild. The rancher stepped aside, his elbow flashing sharp, sending the man stumbling back, gasping for air. Silence followed, broken only by the groans of the men in the dirt. The girl pressed against the trough, eyes wide. She had not seen a gun drawn, yet the fight ended faster than she could breathe. The men scrambled to their feet, cursing, retreating into the shadows with their pride shattered. The rancher stood motionless, shoulders squared, breathing steady as if nothing had happened. Her voice shook. How'd you? He shook his head once, a warning. His eyes, when they met hers, were steel. He turned, walking into the darkness without another word. By dawn the story was everywhere. At the blacksmith's, at the well, inside the church where candles guttered. Men spoke of how 3 were laid out by one, and how he never raised steel to do it. The sheriff stormed through the street by mid-morning, his jaw tight, his badge gleaming. He stopped each witness, each gossip, demanding the truth. Every tale matched, and each one put more fire in his eyes. He found a rancher outside the mercantile, stacking sacks of grain into his wagon. You think you're some kind of law here? The sheriff barked. Beat 3 men, half to death, and walk away like it's nothing. The rancher straightened, turned slow, the sack still in his grip. Dust drifted from the burlap in the sunlight. His voice came low, even. They came at her. I stopped them. That girl ain't your business, the sheriff snapped. And neither's this town. His hand hovered near his holster. You meddle again, I'll see you hung. The rancher's gaze dropped to the sheriff's gun, then rose back to his eyes, steady as bedrock. He said nothing, only lifted another sack, laid it in the wagon, his movements unhurried, final. The sheriff swore under his breath, spat into the dust, and stalked off, his boots loud against the boards. That evening the widow sat in her rocker, her shawl wrapped tight, her eyes on the rancher as he walked his horse to water. She called to him from her porch. You move like a soldier, she said. He paused, hand resting on the horse's neck. I've seen enough in my years to know, she went on, her voice cracked but sharp. Men come back from wars with that same silence. Only you. Yours ain't from our wars. He didn't answer. He poured water into the trough, the sound splashing into the quiet. She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. Where'd you fight, stranger? What field left your eyes that hollow? For a long moment he stood still, shadow stretching long in the lantern light. Then he said, low and rough, far from here. The words carried weight, heavy and strange, as though they belonged to another century. The widow shivered. She knew better than to press. The saloon owner sat upstairs that same night, cigar smoke curling around him, his men bruised and sullen at his table. One rancher making fools of you, he sneered. One man, and the whole town whispers his name like it's gospel. The bruised man muttered, ain't right the way he moves. Like he's seen this all before. The saloon owner's grin widened, teeth flashing. Good. Let the town whisper. Let him believe he's some kind of ghost. Ghosts die same as men. We'll break him soon enough. He raised his glass, the amber catching the lamplight. And when he falls, the girl falls with him. The girl woke to the sound of boots scuffing outside her alley. She rose quick, clutching her shawl. The rancher stood there, setting down another plate, beans, bread, a slice of meat. I told you, she said, voice sharp. I don't want charity. His reply was simple. Then take it as respect. She froze, unsure. The plate sat between them, steaming faint in the cold air. Slowly, she sank to her knees, her pride cracking beneath hunger. You ain't like the others, she said softly. Why? The rancher's face turned away, shadow cutting across his jaw. Because I've seen worse done to the helpless. The words chilled her more than the night wind. By the next day, the whole town felt it. Something pressing, heavy like the air before a lightning strike. The sheriff's gaze grew sharper, the saloon owner's laughter louder, meaner. The rancher walked through it all, calm, unflinching, though the weight of eyes followed with every step. The storyteller's voice carried faint, like wind across the desert. Dusthart was no stranger to cruelty, but in those days it tasted something different. Not fear, not pity. It was the quiet edge of justice, sharp and waiting. Folks didn't yet know it, but the storm had already risen, and soon it would break. The girl's wrists bled against the rope, tied hard to the market post again, tighter than before. Her breath came shallow in the late sun, her face pale in the red glow of evening. A crowd circled, whispering, their shadows long across the dust. This time was no punishment. This was bait. The sheriff stood by the barber's porch, one hand resting on his holster. The saloon owner leaned against the post of his doorway, cigar burning low, grin thin as a knife. He'll come, the saloon man muttered. Men like him always do. The sheriff spat. Then he won't leave. The street held its breath. Dogs slunk into alleys. Windows cracked open an inch. Somewhere, a piano struck one lonely note, then fell silent. Footsteps. Steady. Slow. Each strike echoed across the boards, over the silence of the town. The rancher stepped into the open, hat brim low, coat flaring slightly in the hot wind. Dust swirled at his boots. He walked straight down the street, eyes fixed on the girl bound at the post. He didn't look at the sheriff. He didn't look at the saloon man. The sheriff called out, voice loud enough to rattle glass. This you're doing, rancher? Think you can take what ain't yours? No answer. Only the sound of boots against dust. The sheriff's hand twitched at his holster. You take one more step, you'll be lying in that dirt. The rancher kept walking. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The saloon owner's smile faltered. At 10 paces, the sheriff drew. The gun flashed silver in the dying sun. But the rancher's hand was faster. His draw was clean, no flourish, no wasted breath. One shot cracked, sharp as thunder, and the sheriff's gun spun from his hand, clattering across the dirt. The badge-bearer staggered back, clutching his bleeding wrist, face pale as chalk. Silence swallowed the street. The saloon owner's grin broke into a snarl. "Kill him," he shouted. From the shadows, his men burst forth, steel flashing, boots pounding. The rancher moved like he had done this 100 times before. His pistol barked twice, dropping 2 men in the dust before their guns cleared leather. A third lunged with a knife, blocked, twisted, sent sprawling with a strike of the rancher's elbow. The blade fell, clattering sharp against stone. The girl twisted against the ropes, eyes wide, the scene burning itself into her soul. The saloon man cursed, retreating to his doorway, calling, "Shoot him! Shoot him, damn you!" But his men fell fast, one by one, each shot of the rancher's gun precise, measured, final. No wasted fire. No second chances. The last man standing dropped his revolver, hand raised. The rancher didn't spare him a glance. His gun turned, leveled at the saloon owner. The crowd parted, pulling back from the doorway as though the air itself had caught flame. The saloon man froze, cigar trembling in his teeth. "You don't scare me," he hissed, though his voice shook. "You ain't law. You're nothing but some ghost walking where you don't belong." The rancher's voice came low, gravel in his throat. "Ghosts don't miss." The shot cracked. The cigar dropped, rolling in the dust. The saloon owner fell back into his own doorway, eyes glassed, chest still. The street went silent. The only sound was the soft creak of ropes straining against the girl's wrists. The rancher holstered his gun, walked forward, and cut the ropes free. She stumbled, caught herself, clutching her arms where the fibers had dug deep. She looked up at him, her lips parting, words failing. He only nodded once. Around them, the townsfolk shifted, their shame heavy in their silence. No one stepped forward. No one spoke. The sheriff stood pale, clutching his ruined hand, unable to lift his eyes. The widow's voice broke the hush from her porch, cracked but carrying clear. "God sends a fighter when the innocent can't fight for themselves." The crowd lowered their heads. The rancher turned, walked down the street through drifting dust. His boots struck steady, fading toward the edge of town. He did not look back. The girl clutched her freed wrists, watching until he was only a shadow against the dying sun. And from somewhere beyond, the storyteller's voice rose, echoing like wind through canyon stone. No one knew where he came from, nor where he went after. Some said he was a rancher. Some swore he was a soldier. Others claimed he was never of this time at all. But in Dust's heart, they remember the day he came, bread in one hand and justice in the other. The day's silence broke, and a town of cowards was forced to see itself in the mirror of a lonely man's courage. They call him a ghost still, but a ghost who carried the weight of the living. The story ended as the dust settled, but its echo lingered, carried on in hushed voices around campfires, told by old men with long memories and children who never tired of listening. For in Dust's heart, the day the rancher offered bread became the day he offered justice, and both tasted sweeter than the town had ever deserved.